Good morning, good evening, all. Thanks for joining us today. If you're new to these webinars, welcome. If not, great to have you back. This webinar is recorded and you'll be able to get the recording on our live community page after the webinar ends. We send out the link to that live community page via email, and then I'll also post it in the chat at the end of this session. Please do use the Q&A feature instead of the chat. The reason is we do have an organized queue on the Q&A side, and on the chat, questions can get buried and sometimes we miss them. So thank you for that in advance. All right, and on this call, we have Wellington. He is a Cortex customer success. He's on the Cortex customer success team, and he'll be answering questions throughout the webinar via the Q&A. And after it ends as well out loud. So please do send your questions. We want them, and it helps us sort of understand where your struggles are, what you'd like to learn more of. All right, and with that, we can go ahead and get started.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. In this webinar, we will focus on the enablement of the correlation rules feature in Cortex XDR. Today's presenter is myself, Wellington Selden, Senior Customer Success Architect for Cortex XDR. In this webinar, we will discuss correlation rules, an example use case, the prerequisites, how to configure the feature, verification, basic troubleshooting, and some additional resources that you may reference once you have completed the video. Correlation rules help threat hunters analyze the correlation of multiple events from multiple sources by using the Cortex XDR XQL-based engine for creating scheduled rules called correlation rules. Alerts can then be triggered based on these correlation rules with a defined time frame and a set schedule, including every X minutes, once a day, once a week, or a custom time. Before you begin to leverage the correlation rule feature, there are some prerequisites to note. Correlation rules require a Cortex XDR Pro per terabyte or Pro per endpoint license. The building blocks for correlation rules are based on the data collection from custom collectors, collection integrations, and the broker VM. The base of a correlation rule is an SQL query, so it is important to have familiarity with the SQL query language. The goal of this webinar is to enable the correlation rule feature, so we will not be doing a deep dive on data ingestion, parsing rules, and investigations or SQL features. In terms of setup and permissions, users will need to ensure that they are assigned to a role that includes investigation and configuration permissions from the applicable components and data sets in scope. Cortex XDR can provide visibility into your external data in the form of log stitching with other logs, such as to create network or authentication stories, raw data and query from SQL search, alerts reported by vendors, and analytics alerts. Where you can view information ingested from external sources depends on the data source. In the Cortex XDR admin guide, we have a tech doc that describes the visibility of data, log, and alert of each vendor and device type that is supported by Cortex XDR. To ingest data, you must set up a syslog collector applet on a broker VM within your network. Configure collection integrations as shown in the GIF or custom external sources. As previously mentioned in this webinar, we will not be doing a deep dive on log collection, so I invite the attendees to view the previously recorded webinars and applicable tech docs for more information. Let's take a look at rule creation. SecOps analysts will need to ensure that they are assigned to a role that includes investigation and configuration permissions. A correlation rule is broken into 5 sections, and 4 out of the 5 sections contain required fields. The alert suppression section is not required to create a correlation rule. The first required field is the general field. to provide a name and description of the correlation rule. This will help to identify and provide context to an alert when triggered in the alert table. Next is SQL search. The base of a correlation rule is an SQL query, which can include most of the available SQL query options. Please note that transaction and call SQL functions and wildcard used in place of a data set are not supported by a correlation, and as such, SQL queries containing those will not be able to be saved as a correlation rule. The SecOps analyst can start from within the SQL query screen to build and test the query for the desired results and save as a correlation rule. Alternatively, the SecOps analyst can create a new correlation rule from the correlation screen and enter the SQL query in place, or pivot to the open full query mode to the SQL search screen. In the timing field, the time schedule, the SecOps analyst can choose to schedule to run the correlation rule, while the minimum time is every 10 minutes, and choose the time zone for the schedule relevant only for daily or custom, every 10 to 20 to 30 minutes, hourly, daily, or custom, where SecOps can configure a cron expression to schedule the correlation. The query timeframe, the timeframe to run the SQL query on, the upper limit is 7 days, and the default time zone is the browser's time zone. Define whether an alert generated by correlation rules are suppressed by a duration time or duration field, or both. For example, a rule that may involve brute force type activity, a SecOps admin may want to suppress additional alerts for the same user for 1 day, but still want to trigger a new alert if a different user is applicable. Enable and alert suppression by default is unchecked, so the correlation rule is not configured to suppress alerts by default. The duration time is for how long to ignore other events that match the alert suppression criteria fields. The default is 1 hour, the maximum is 1 day. Field users can select the fields that suppress will be on multi-select. SecOps and admin can select multiple fields. Fields are based on the SQL query run result set. Select all means that all fields from the alert match and must match in order to be suppressed. This will generate multiple alerts during the suppression period. If none of the fields are selected, will only generate one alert during the suppression period. A SecOps analyst has two options to set the resulting action for the correlation rule. You can either generate an alert or save the data to a data set. In the generate an alert option, the correlation rule output will create an alert type called correlation, according to the core configured options. The use case to save the correlation rule as a data set is for the purpose of fine-tuning or using a saved rule as a building block for an additional correlation rule, which will be based on results of the first correlation rule. You may consider to generate an alert option first until you become more familiar with the expected behavior of the correlation rule workflow. In creating a correlation rule, you want to have a clearly defined use case, which is not already handled by Cortex XDR core capabilities. Example given here is BIOC, analytics, or BTP. The goal is to create a rule that when it generates an alert, your SecOps team will need to take investigative action. You do not want to create a rule where the alerts have low fidelity and ultimately will be ignored by your analyst. So let's take a look at one example use case using Okta single sign-on. In this use case, we are leveraging the Okta dataset. The collection of Okta identity and access management service logs was set up through the data collection integration and configuration section of the Cortex XDR. I'm providing this use case for the sake of enablement. The details of the SQL query require working knowledge of array functions and regular expression implementation. For example, an array index function returns the value contained in a specified array position. Arrays with zero base and negative indexing is supported. The regex extract function accepts a string and regular expression and returns an array containing substrings that match the expression. XQL uses RE2 for its regular expression implementation. The drill down query provides you with a concise query results by deduping the fields within the user and country columns. As part of the investigation, a SecOps analyst can investigate contributing events. In the screenshot, we can determine the amount of interest we've seen, the count of interest we've seen logging from multiple countries within a 24-hour span. The SecOps team could then follow their internal response workflows to determine next steps. During your investigation, you may leverage additional Cortex XDR views, such as the open user view, which may be used to add more context into your investigation. The view is not specific to the correlation rules feature, but is a powerful way to investigate user type assets by reducing the number of steps it takes to collect and research a user. There are 3 workflows that a SecOps analyst may use to configure correlation rules. There is no wrong or right way to access your correlation rule configuration, but it's good to know the alternative workflows in order to quickly take action as needed. Next, we will go over 3 troubleshooting scenarios and provide troubleshooting options to address them. I'm highlighting these 3 scenarios in this webinar because it is possible that you may encounter them during your journey with the correlation rules. But I also believe that understanding of the troubleshooting scenarios also enforces our goal of enablement. Scenario 1, no alerts, beta set created. In this scenario, you created a new correlation rule to either alert or as a data set, but no alert or data set is created. Existing correlation rules stop creating new alerts or saving new results to be a data set. The troubleshooting options here are, the first thing would be to run an SQL query and see if it returns any results. Be mindful of the time. If no results return, the XDR admin should refine the SQL query. The correlation rule might rely on a data set, which is a result of a parsing rule, and parsing rules might have changed or been edited and no longer provides the same output or fields that the correlation rule relies on. SQL does return results. You need to check if the alert suppression is enabled and check the conditions. The alert might be suppressed due to time or fields configured. In scenario 2, you have incorrect field values in the correlation results. In this scenario, you configure the correlation rule and expect to see specific values in the alert or data set, but instead you see unrelated values or incorrect ones. Example, you expected to see a SHA-256 hash, but instead you see a file name. The troubleshooting options here is this is usually related to alert field mapping, which was possible configured or mapped incorrectly to a wrong field. Map the file name field versus the hash field. The source of the data set SQL query is using the correlation rule send the wrong or incorrect data. Can be verified by running the correlation SQL query and checking the specific column or field to verify the results before it was mapped. In our third scenario, alert description shows null or empty. In this scenario, SecOps admin configured a correlation rule to generate an alert with the description containing parameters from the SQL query. They can see the alert, but the description contains null or empty strings within the description instead of the actual values. Our troubleshooting options here are the null or empty strings are actual values. Those fields were assigned as a result of the SQL query result set. Run the original SQL query from the correlation rule and expect the results assigned to the fields in question to verify that the null or empty values come from the source of those logs. The correlation rule prints null or empty values as a string instead of just printing white space that will look like something is broken. Instead, XDR prints the actual string so the SecOps admin can revisit the query and check the values. The key takeaways for this webinar: correlation rules offer a way to create detection rules based on one or multiple data sources. Therefore, you do not want to create detection rules that will generate noise in your alert table. Remember, Cortex XDR offers multiple ways to detect and prevent threats within its core capabilities. When creating a correlation rule, you want to have a clearly defined use case, so when the alert triggers, your SecOps team knows how to respond according to your IR work plan. Thank you for joining this webinar.
All right, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Wellington to take any additional questions.
Sure. Yeah, before we officially wrap up, we'd love to answer any additional questions. I've been actively responding to queries throughout the webinar. Again, the goal here is to focus on the correlation rule enablement. So send any additional questions through the Q&A widget. I did notice through the chat as well, there's an inquiry about data set. I did call out the use case in terms of as it relates to the correlation rule, but I suggest to also take a look at the surrounding features within our tech docs to understand if you're not familiar already with the data set as it relates to the additional data sources that can be ingested. So I'll drop a link to the tech doc in reference, and feel free to take a look at that. Yep, so maybe just as a quick summation of everything that's captured thus far is that the correlation rule is for the use case of the additional data that's been ingested into your Cortex XDR application, but you also want to keep in mind the core capabilities that are already in place with XDR as well. Again, you don't want to create too much noise in your environment, so the goal is to create a correlation rule with high efficacy, something that your SecOps team is going to, once the alert is triggered, want to be able to take action on. There's a really good tech doc for those that are interested in the additional data that's ingested. I'll drop this in the chat as well. And for the sake of the recording, the tech doc that I'm referencing is the visibility of logs and alerts from external sources in XDR. So there's numerous ways to ingest additional data. So for the sake of being effective in terms of the correlation rule, I focused on one use case just for the goal of enablement, but the tech doc calls out the additional data sources and how they may be leveraged in terms of existing core capabilities. So one of note would be the analytics engine. So just to keep that in mind as well. So because this is a complex topic, the slides included GIFs as well as screenshots and output of an example query for the sake of enablement for more effective communication style, as well as easier use for the attendees here to understand the workflows of the correlation rule. Okay, so I believe we've covered all our core questions. I'll pass it back over to you, Narissa.
Hi, everyone. All right, so, oh, and I see another question.
No, there's no additional licensing beyond the XDR Pro per endpoint or Pro per terabyte.
Yeah, and the question was, does this require additional licensing beyond just the Cortex XDR Pro, such as licensing to send additional log data sources to the Cortex data lake?
Yeah, so this is a feature that's already available to XDR Pro customers.
Awesome. So I think what we'll do is we'll hang tight for just a few more moments. I know sometimes it takes a minute to, think of questions. And then if we don't get any in the next 5 or so minutes, we'll start wrapping up, but we'll be here for a little bit.
Yes, so there's a question about, so when saving data sets, you can run correlation rules against those saved data sets. The answer to that is yes. And there is the additional context into those additional data sources, which will be saved as data sets in the log visibility tech dog. You can also leverage the, depending on your use case, the XDR data set as well. That's basically the information that's collected from your XDR agent.
I do see a few more questions in the chat. One is, where are the videos and the KVs on setting up the logging from your on-prem environment? Wellington, do you have?
Sure, yeah. At the previously recorded webinar last month, there was a good webinar from one of my colleagues about the ingestion of logs. So keeping the focus here on correlation rules was, this is more the downstream effort once the logs have been ingested. So if you're looking for more information about logging or log ingestion, I invite the attendees to check out the previously recorded webinars as well.
I'll provide those links in just a moment as well.
Okay. And yes, this presentation will also be available on demand at the completion of this webinar as well.
All right, so not really seeing anything else come in, so we'll go ahead and conclude this session. Thanks all for attending this webinar. Don't forget to provide us your feedback so we can continuously improve your experience for future sessions. As mentioned, a recording of this webinar will be published on our live community XDR technologies page with other webinars, videos, XDR content. And I'll go ahead and post that link and the webinars page link in the chat right now, so you have that handy. One moment. All right. Great. And so that page link is up top, and then the webinar page direct link is there as well. And as Wellington mentioned, the log ingestion webinars on there as well. For any unanswered questions during this session, they're either out of scope or require additional research. Please feel free to post any unanswered questions in the live community discussions forum. This is a public forum, so no confidential information, please. The technical Cortex customer success team is on there, as well as other Palo Alto Networks experts and community members that are actively involved in answering questions there. So yes, definitely visit that page, and I'll actually link that in the chat as well. All right, so thanks again for attending all. We hope to see you next time, and take care.
Thanks, everyone.